What is Kubernetes?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubernetes is an open-source container orchestration platform that automates the deployment, scaling, and management of containerized applications. What is a Kubernetes pod?
3, 2, 1, 0.
A pod is the smallest deployable unit in Kubernetes and consists of one or more containers that share storage, network, and a specification for how to run the containers. How do you scale a Kubernetes deployment?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Use the kubectl scale command to scale a deployment. For example, kubectl scale deployment less than name greater than replicas equals less than number greater than to adjust the number of pod replicas. What is a replica set in Kubernetes?
3, 2, 1, 0.
A replica set ensures that a specified number of pod replicas are running at all times, replacing any that fail or get terminated. What is the difference between a replica set and a deployment?
3, 2, 1, 0.
A deployment manages replica sets and provides declarative updates to applications, whereas a replica set only ensures the specified number of replicas are running. What is a Kubernetes namespace?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Namespaces are used to divide cluster resources between multiple users, allowing for the isolation of environments and resource quotas. How do you check the logs of a running pod?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Use the kubectl logs less than pod underscore name greater than command to view the logs of a specific pod. You can use C to specify the container if the pod has multiple containers. What is a config map in Kubernetes?
3, 2, 1, 0.
A config map is a key value store used to configure applications running in Kubernetes. It decouples environment-specific configuration from application code. How does a Kubernetes service work?
3, 2, 1, 0.
A Kubernetes service is an abstraction that exposes a set of pods as a network service. It allows pods to communicate with each other or with external users. What are the different types of Kubernetes services?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubernetes supports 4 types of services: cluster IP, node port, load balancer, and external name, each used for different networking scenarios. What is the purpose of a Kubernetes ingress?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Ingress is an API object that manages external access to services within a cluster, typically through HTTP or HTTPS, allowing for routing traffic to different services. What is a stateful set?
3, 2, 1, 0.
A stateful set manages stateful applications by ensuring that pods have stable network identities and persistent storage, useful for databases and other stateful workloads. What is the difference between a stateful set and a deployment?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Deployments are suited for stateless applications. while stateful sets are used for stateful applications that require stable storage and consistent network IDs. How do you expose a Kubernetes service externally?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Use the node port or load balancer service types to expose services outside the cluster. You can also use an ingress resource for more complex routing. How do you delete a Kubernetes pod?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Use kubectl delete pod less than pod underscore name greater than to delete a pod. Kubernetes will recreate it if it's managed by a replica set, deployment, or other controller. What is a Kubernetes node?
3, 2, 1, 0.
A node is a worker machine in Kubernetes that runs containerized applications. It can be a virtual machine or a physical server. How do you monitor a Kubernetes cluster?
3, 2, 1, 0.
You can monitor a Kubernetes cluster using tools like Prometheus, Grafana, or Kubernetes native solutions like kubectl top for resource usage metrics. What is the role of the Kubernetes API server?
3, 2, 1, 0.
The API server is the central component of Kubernetes, responsible for exposing the Kubernetes API, handling REST requests, and acting as the front end to the cluster. What is an etcd in Kubernetes?
3, 2, 1, 0.
etcd is a distributed key value store used by Kubernetes to store all cluster state data, making it crucial for cluster management and recovery. How does Kubernetes handle load balancing?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubernetes uses services to distribute traffic across pods. For external traffic, a load balancer service or ingress can be used for load balancing. What is Kubernetes RBAC?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Role-based access control. RBAC is a method for managing permissions within a Kubernetes cluster by assigning roles and access levels to users and service accounts. What is a Kubernetes persistent volume, PV?
3, 2, 1, 0.
A persistent volume is a storage resource in a Kubernetes cluster that exists independently of any pod and provides durable storage for applications. What is a persistent volume claim, PVC?
3, 2, 1, 0.
A PVC is a request for storage by a user. Pods use PVCs to access persistent volumes and abstract the storage details from the pods. Perspective. How does Kubernetes manage rolling updates?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubernetes performs rolling updates using deployments, gradually replacing old pods with new ones without downtime. Use kubectl rollout commands to manage this. What is a Kubernetes cron job?
3, 2, 1, 0.
A cron job in Kubernetes schedules jobs to run at specific times or intervals. Similar to cron jobs in Linux systems, automating recurring tasks. How do you update a Kubernetes deployment without downtime?
3, 2, 1,
Perform a rolling update by updating the deployment object. Kubernetes will automatically replace old pods with new ones while keeping the application running. What is the purpose of kubectl describe?
3, 2, 1, 0.
The kubectl describe command provides detailed information about Kubernetes resources, such as pods, services, and nodes, including configuration and status. How do you troubleshoot a failing pod in Kubernetes?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Use kubectl logs less than pod_name greater than to check the pod logs. Kubectl describe less than pod_name greater than for more details. And kubectl get events to view the cluster's recent events. What is a Kubernetes admission controller?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Admission controllers are plugins that govern and enforce how the cluster is used, intercepting requests to the API server before they are processed. How do you perform a rollback in Kubernetes?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Use kubectl rollout undo deployment less than deployment _name greater than to revert to a previous version of a deployment after an update. What is a Kubernetes job?
3, 2, 1, 0.
A Kubernetes job ensures that a specified number of pods successfully complete a task. Once the task is completed, the pods are terminated. What is the function of a service account in Kubernetes?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Service accounts are used by pods to authenticate and interact with the Kubernetes API server, especially for applications requiring API access. How do you manage resource limits for Kubernetes pods?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Set resources, limits and resources, requests in the pod specification to control the CPU and memory a pod can use, ensuring efficient resource management. What is horizontal pod autoscaler (HPA) in Kubernetes?
3, 2, 1, 0.
HPA automatically scales the number of pod replicas based on observed CPU utilization or custom metrics, helping to manage application load. How does Kubernetes handle high availability (HA)?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubernetes ensures high availability using multiple master nodes, distributing control plane components, and replicating etcd across multiple nodes. How do you drain a Kubernetes node?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Use kubectl drain less than node_name greater than to safely evict all pods from a node before maintenance or upgrades, ensuring the cluster remains functional. What is the purpose of taints and tolerations in Kubernetes?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Taints and tolerations are used to ensure certain pods are not scheduled on specific nodes or to schedule pods with matching tolerations on tainted nodes. How do you delete all pods in a Kubernetes namespace?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Use kubectl delete pods, all n less than namespace greater than to delete all pods in a specific namespace. What is a sidecar container in Kubernetes?
3, 2, 1, 0.
A sidecar container runs alongside the main container in the same pod, providing additional functionality, like logging, monitoring, or proxying. How do you handle node failures in Kubernetes?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubernetes detects node failures via the kubelet and controller manager and reschedules pods on healthy nodes using replica sets or deployments. What is a Kubernetes cluster IP service?
3, 2, 1, 0.
A cluster IP service exposes the service on an internal IP within the cluster, making it accessible only from within the cluster. What is kube proxy in Kubernetes?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kube proxy is a network proxy that runs on each node in the cluster and maintains network rules for allowing communication to services in the cluster. How do you update a Kubernetes secret?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Use kubectl create secret to create a new secret. Or use kubectl edit secret less than secret underscore name greater than to modify an existing one. You may also use the dry run flag to preview changes before applying. What are Helm charts?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Helm is a package manager for Kubernetes that simplifies deploying and managing Kubernetes applications through charts, which are pre-configured application resources. What is a Kubernetes PV reclaim policy?
3, 2, 1, 0.
The reclaim policy for persistent volumes, PV, controls what happens to the volume when a PVC is deleted. The policies can be retain, recycle, or delete. How do you troubleshoot Kubernetes pod status?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Use kubectl describe pod less than pod underscore name greater than to check events and pod details. Use kubectl get pods namespace equals less than namespace greater than to view the status of all pods in the namespace. What is the purpose of the kubelet?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubelet is an agent that runs on each Kubernetes node, ensuring that the containers in a pod are running according to the specifications provided in the pod manifest. What is a Kubernetes endpoint?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Endpoints define the IP addresses and ports of individual pods that a service should forward traffic to. These are dynamically updated as pods come and go. How do you perform a canary deployment in Kubernetes?
3, 2, 1, 0.
You can perform a canary deployment by gradually introducing new versions of your application to a subset of users using tools like Kubernetes deployments or Istio. What is a Kubernetes operator?
3, 2, 1, 0.
An operator is a method of packaging, deploying, and managing a Kubernetes application. It is built using custom resources to extend the Kubernetes API to manage application lifecycles. What is kubectl apply and how is it different from kubectl create?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubectl apply is used for declarative management, allowing updates to resources, while kubectl create is used for imperative resource creation. How do you roll back a Kubernetes secret?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubernetes does not natively support secret rollback, so you would need to manually reapply the previous version of the secret using kubectl apply f less than previous _ secret YAML greater than. What is the horizontal pod autoscaler HPA based on?
3, 2, 1, 0.
The HPA scales the number of pods based on observed CPU utilization, memory usage, or custom metrics specified in the pod's definition. How can you limit resource consumption for a namespace in Kubernetes?
3, 2, 1, 0.
You can use a resource quota object to limit the total amount of CPU, memory, and other resources that can be consumed by all pods in a namespace. What is the purpose of kubectl exec?
3, 2, 1, 0.
The kubectl exec command allows you to execute commands in a running container, useful for debugging or interacting with a pod's shell. What are custom resources in Kubernetes?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Custom resources allow you to extend Kubernetes by defining new types of resources that behave similarly to built-in objects like pods, services, and deployments. How do you manage Kubernetes node affinity?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Use node affinity to control pod scheduling by defining rules that specify which nodes a pod can or cannot be scheduled on based on node labels. How does Kubernetes manage versioning during a rolling update?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubernetes maintains the previous replica set during a rolling update, allowing a quick rollback if the new deployment encounters issues. What is a network policy in Kubernetes?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Network policies define how pods communicate with each other and other network endpoints. You can restrict or allow traffic between pods, namespaces, or IP blocks. What are init containers in Kubernetes?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Init containers are specialized containers that run before app containers start in a pod. They are used for initialization tasks like setting up a service dependency. How does Kubernetes handle application failures?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubernetes monitors the health of pods using liveness and readiness probes. If a pod fails, Kubernetes automatically restarts it or reschedules it on another node. How do you change the image version of a running pod in Kubernetes?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Use kubectl set image deployment less than deployment underscore name greater than less than container underscore name greater than equals less than image underscore name greater than less than tag greater than to update the image of the container in a deployment. What is Kubernetes RBAC role-based access control.
3, 2, 1, 0.
RBAC is used to control access to the Kubernetes API based on roles assigned to users or service accounts, ensuring proper permissions and security. How do you expose an internal Kubernetes service externally?
3, 2, 1, 0.
You can expose an internal service externally by using a node port or load balancer service, or by creating an ingress resource. What is Kube Scheduler?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kube Scheduler is a control plane component responsible for assigning pods to available nodes in the cluster based on resource requirements and scheduling constraints. What are Kubernetes taints and tolerations?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Taints prevent pods from being scheduled on certain nodes, while tolerations allow specific pods to ignore those taints and be scheduled on those nodes if necessary. How do you enable resource requests and limits in a pod definition?
3, 2, 1, 0.
You can define resource requests and limits by specifying them in the pod's container spec under the Resources field, setting CPU and memory values. How do you restart a Kubernetes pod manually?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubernetes doesn't have a direct restart command, but you can restart a pod by deleting it with kubectl delete pod less than pod underscore name greater than, and it will be recreated automatically if it's part of a deployment or replica set. What is the difference between CPU request and CPU limit in Kubernetes?
3, 2, 1, 0.
CPU request is the guaranteed minimum CPU for a pod, while CPU limit is the maximum CPU a pod can use. Kubernetes schedules based on requests, but enforces limits during execution. How do you manage persistent storage in Kubernetes?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Persistent storage in Kubernetes is managed using persistent volumes, PVs, and persistent volume claims, PVCs, abstracting the storage layer for applications. What is the role of the Kubernetes Controller Manager?
3, 2, 1, 0.
The Controller Manager is responsible for ensuring that the desired state of the system matches the current state, running various controllers like the node, replication, and endpoints controllers. How do you update a Kubernetes deployment declaratively?
3, 2, 1, 0.
To update a deployment declaratively, you modify the YAML file representing the deployment and use kubectl apply f less than file, YAML greater than to apply the changes. What is a Kubernetes node port service?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Node port exposes a service on each node's IP address at a static port, allowing external traffic to reach the service through the node's IP and the node port. What is Kubernetes CRI, Container Runtime Interface?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Free is an API used by Kubernetes to interact with container runtimes like Docker or Containerd, providing abstraction and flexibility in choosing runtimes. How do you scale down a Kubernetes deployment?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Use kubectl scale deployment less than deployment underscore name greater than replicas equals less than number greater than to scale down the number of pod replicas for a deployment. What is the role of a Kubernetes service mesh?
3, 2, 1, 0.
A service mesh, like Istio or Linked, manages the communication between services in a microservices architecture, providing traffic management, observability, and security. What is the Kubernetes control plane?
3, 2, 1, 0.
The control plane is the set of components responsible for managing the state of a Kubernetes cluster, including the API server, scheduler, controller manager, and etcd. How does Kubernetes perform health checks on pods?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubernetes uses liveness and readiness probes to check the health of a pod. Liveness probes check if the pod should be restarted, while readiness probes check if it is ready to serve traffic. What are Kubernetes annotations?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Annotations are key value pairs used to attach arbitrary non-identifying metadata to objects, like configuration details, debugging information, or custom resources. How do you roll out an application update in Kubernetes?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Use kubectl rollout restart deployment less than deployment underscore name greater than to trigger a rolling update or modify the deployment YAML with a new image version and use kubectl apply. What is a Kubernetes HPA, horizontal pod autoscaler?
3, 2, 1, 0.
HPA automatically scales the number of pod replicas based on observed CPU, memory, or custom metrics to handle fluctuating workloads. How does Kubernetes handle service discovery?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubernetes service discovery is achieved through DNS, where a service creates a DNS entry that other pods can use to communicate with it. What is a Kubernetes deployment strategy?
3, 2, 1, 0.
A deployment strategy determines how updates to applications are applied. Common strategies include rolling update and recreate, where rolling update ensures zero downtime. What is the difference between load balancer and ingress in Kubernetes?
3, 2, 1, 0.
A load balancer service provides an external IP for a single service, while ingress is used to manage external access and can route traffic to multiple services based on rules. How does Kubernetes manage resource efficiency with overcommitment?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubernetes allows overcommitment by letting pods request fewer resources than their limit, maximizing resource usage but throttling pods if they exceed their limits. What is a kubectl port forward and when would you use it?
3, 2, 1,
Kubectl port forward allows you to forward one or more local ports to a pod, enabling you to access a pod's service locally, typically for debugging or testing. How do you access the Kubernetes dashboard?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Install the Kubernetes dashboard by applying the dashboard YAML file and access it using Kubectl proxy. Then navigate to the specified URL with a valid token. How do Kubernetes volumes differ from Docker volumes?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubernetes volumes are tied to the lifecycle of a pod, with multiple volume types, e.g., empty dir, host path, while Docker volumes persist independently of container lifecycles. What are persistent volume (PV) and persistent volume claim (PVC)?
3, 2, 1, 0.
PV is a piece of storage provisioned in the cluster, and PVC is a request for that storage by a pod, binding the pod to a PV for persistent storage. How does Kubernetes support multi-tenancy?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubernetes supports multi-tenancy through namespaces, RBAC, network policies, and resource quotas, providing logical isolation for users and workloads. What is the purpose of Kubectl proxy?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubectl proxy is used to create a proxy between your local machine and the Kubernetes API server, enabling access to the API via localhost without external authentication. What is a Kubernetes lease?
3, 2, 1, 0.
A lease is a mechanism for distributed systems to achieve leader election. Kubernetes uses it to ensure that only one instance of a pod or controller ACTS is the leader. How can you run a Kubernetes cluster locally?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Use Minikube or Kind Kubernetes in Docker to run a local Kubernetes cluster for development and testing purposes. What is a Kubernetes service account and when would you use it?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Service accounts are used to provide identity for pods, allowing them to access the Kubernetes API. It's useful when applications need to interact with the cluster's resources. How does Kubernetes handle secret encryption?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubernetes can encrypt secrets at rest using encryption providers like AES-CBC or Envelope. Encryption with external KMS providers, e.g., AWS KMS. What is the difference between Kubectl get and Kubectl describe?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubectl get lists resources in a cluster, while Kubectl describe provides detailed information, including configuration and events related to a specific resource. What is the purpose of Kubernetes resource quotas?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Resource quotas limit the CPU, memory, storage, and object resources, e.g., pods, services, that can be consumed in a namespace, preventing resource exhaustion. How does Kubernetes implement persistent storage in a multi-cloud environment?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubernetes allows integration with different cloud storage providers through persistent volumes, storage classes, and CSI, container storage interface, drivers. What is a cluster role in Kubernetes?
3, 2, 1, 0.
A cluster role defines permissions cluster-wide. Unlike a role, which is namespace-specific, it grants access to resources across all namespaces. What is the Kubernetes API server's role in cluster management?
3, 2, 1, 0.
The API server ACTS is the gateway to the Kubernetes control plane, processing REST requests and providing an interface for managing resources in the cluster. How do you perform a blue-green deployment in Kubernetes?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Deploy a new version of your application alongside the old version and route traffic to the new version after testing it, ensuring minimal downtime. You can use services or ingress for traffic switching. What is the purpose of an etcd in Kubernetes?
3, 2, 1, 0.
etcd is a distributed key-value store that stores all cluster data, including configuration, state, and metadata, acting as the backbone of the control plane. How can you secure a Kubernetes cluster?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Secure a Kubernetes cluster by enabling RBAC, setting up network policies, using pod security policies, enabling audit logs, encrypting secrets, and limiting cluster access. What is kubectl-diff used for?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubectl-diff allows you to compare the changes that would be made by a Kubernetes manifest to the existing resources in the cluster, useful for previewing updates. What is the role of the kube app server?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kube app server is the front end for the Kubernetes control plane, handling requests from clients and other components, validating them, and updating the cluster state. How do you manage stateful applications in Kubernetes?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Stateful sets manage stateful applications by ensuring pods have unique identities and persistent storage, used for applications like databases that require stable storage. What are Kubernetes labels?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Labels are key-value pairs attached to objects such as pods and services. They are used to identify, organize, and select objects via label selectors. How can you drain a node in Kubernetes?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Use kubectl drain less than node underscore name greater than to gracefully evict pods from a node before maintenance or decommissioning, ensuring workload redistribution. What is the difference between stateful sets and daemon sets?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Stateful sets are used for stateful applications requiring persistent storage and unique identities, while daemon sets ensure that a copy of a pod runs on all or specified nodes. What is kubectl rollout history?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubectl rollout history displays the previous revisions of a deployment or other rollout objects, allowing you to review and revert to earlier versions. What is a Kubernetes sidecar pattern?
3, 2, 1, 0.
The sidecar pattern involves deploying a helper container in the same pod as the main container to extend or enhance the functionality of the primary application, e.g., logging, monitoring. How do you enable auditing in Kubernetes?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Enable Kubernetes auditing by configuring audit policies and logs, allowing you to track API requests and detect security events or operational issues. How does Kubernetes manage secrets?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubernetes manages secrets using secret objects, which store sensitive data like passwords or tokens. Secrets can be mounted as volumes or exposed as environment variables. What are Kubernetes static pods?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Static pods are managed directly by the kubelet and are not associated with a Kubernetes API object. They are defined in the kubelet configuration and run on the node. What is a Kubernetes config map?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Config maps are used to store non-sensitive configuration data, like environment variables, command line arguments, or config files, that can be injected into pods. What are Kubernetes custom controllers?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Custom controllers are extensions to the Kubernetes control loop that use custom resources, CRDs, to manage custom application logic or infrastructure automation. What is the role of the Kube Controller Manager?
3, 2, 1, 0.
The Kube Controller Manager runs controllers that regulate the state of the system, such as the replication controller, endpoint controller, and namespace controller. How do you monitor Kubernetes clusters?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Use tools like Prometheus, Grafana, or Kubernetes native tools like Kube State Metrics to monitor cluster health, pod metrics, node utilization, and more. What are Kubernetes taints and tolerations used for?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Taints allow nodes to repel certain pods, while tolerations let pods run on nodes with specific taints, ensuring that workloads are scheduled appropriately. How do you update the Kube AppServer configuration?
3, 2, 1, 0.
You update the Kube AppServer configuration by editing its deployment manifest for self-hosted clusters or configuration file, then restarting the control plane components. How does Kubernetes manage node failures?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubernetes detects node failures using node heartbeats, and the node controller marks the node as not ready. The cluster may reschedule pods on other available nodes. How does Kubernetes handle scaling?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubernetes supports both manual scaling using kubectl and automatic scaling using the horizontal pod autoscaler (HPA) and vertical pod autoscaler (VPA). What are Kubernetes finalizers?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Finalizers are fields on Kubernetes objects that delay object deletion until certain conditions are met, ensuring proper cleanup of related resources before deletion. What is a Kubernetes replication controller?
3, 2, 1, 0.
A replication controller ensures a specified number of pod replicas are running at any given time, automatically starting new pods if any fail or are deleted. What is a Kubernetes deployment rollback?
3, 2, 1, 0.
A rollback reverts a deployment to a previous version if the current deployment has errors. Use kubectl rollout undo to revert to an earlier deployment revision. How does Kubernetes manage pod disruptions?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubernetes uses pod disruption budgets (PDB) to limit the number of pods that can be disrupted, e.g., evicted, at one time, ensuring service availability during maintenance. What is the difference between kubectl CP and kubectl exec?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubectl CP copies files between containers and the local file system, while kubectl exec runs commands within a container, typically for debugging purposes. But what is Kubernetes kubectl used for?
3, 2, 1, 0.
kubectl is a tool that automates the installation and configuration of Kubernetes clusters, simplifying tasks like control plane setup and cluster joining. How do you troubleshoot pod networking issues in Kubernetes?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Use kubectl describe pod. Check network policies. Investigate CNI plugin logs. And use tools like ping, curl, or netstat from within pods to debug networking issues. How can you ensure high availability in a Kubernetes cluster?
3, 2, 1, 0.
High availability is achieved by using multiple master nodes, setting up etcd clusters, and distributing the control plane across multiple nodes or regions. What is the purpose of a Kubernetes namespace?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Namespaces are used to create virtual clusters within a physical cluster, providing a way to isolate resources and manage them separately for different teams or projects. What is Kubernetes garbage collection?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubernetes automatically cleans up unused resources like pods, replica sets, and images using garbage collection, ensuring that resources are properly deallocated. How do you enable container logging in Kubernetes?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Container logs are captured by the kubelet and stored on the node. Use kubectl logs less than pod_name greater than to retrieve logs, or integrate tools like Fluentd or Elasticsearch for centralized logging. How do you manage stateful workloads in Kubernetes?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Stateful sets are used to manage stateful applications, ensuring that each pod has a unique identity and persistent storage. Unlike stateless workloads managed by deployments. What is a Kubernetes pod security policy, PSP?
3, 2, 1, 0.
PSPs are security policies that control the security contexts of pods, such as restricting privilege escalation or defining which users and groups pods can run as. What is the purpose of kubectl patch?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubectl patch is used to update Kubernetes resources declaratively, allowing you to modify specific fields of a resource without changing the entire YAML file. How do you manage pod priority in Kubernetes?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Pod priorities are assigned using the priority class field, ensuring that higher priority pods are scheduled before lower priority ones in resource-constrained clusters. How does Kubernetes ensure data consistency with etcd?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubernetes uses etcd, a distributed key-value store, which guarantees consistency and availability through a consensus algorithm, Raft, ensuring that all nodes agree on the data. How does Kubernetes handle pod restarts?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Pods are restarted automatically if a failure occurs. Kubernetes uses liveness probes to determine if a pod is in a failed state and needs to be restarted. What is the role of the Kubernetes CSI, Container Storage Interface?
3, 2, 1, 0.
The CSI allows third-party storage providers to integrate with Kubernetes, making it easier to provision, attach, and manage persistent storage within the cluster. What is a Kubernetes resource limit range?
3, 2, 1, 0.
A limit range defines the default and maximum resource usage, CPU, memory, for containers in a namespace, ensuring that no single container monopolizes resources. How do you upgrade a Kubernetes cluster?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Upgrade a Kubernetes cluster using KUBED-M upgrade, starting with the control plane components, then upgrading nodes by draining and rejoining them. How does Kubernetes ensure node isolation for specific workloads?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Node isolation is achieved using taints, tolerations, and node affinity rules, ensuring that certain workloads only run on specific nodes based on labels or resource availability. What is the purpose of a Kubernetes service account?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Service accounts provide identity to pods, allowing them to authenticate with the Kubernetes API or other services securely. Each pod is assigned a default service account. How do you configure multi-cluster Kubernetes federation? Kubernetes Federation allows management of multiple clusters. Use kubeved to configure federated clusters. Synchronizing resources like namespaces and deployments across clusters. What are dynamic provisioning and static provisioning in Kubernetes?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Static provisioning requires an administrator to pre-create persistent volumes, PVs, while dynamic provisioning automatically creates storage when a persistent volume claim, PVC, is made. How do you migrate workloads between Kubernetes clusters?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Use tools like Velero for backup and restore, or Helm to redeploy workloads. You can also use federation or multi-cloud deployment strategies to migrate workloads seamlessly. What is a Kubernetes scheduler (EUROS) role?
3, 2, 1, 0.
The Kubernetes scheduler assigns pods to nodes based on resource requirements and constraints like node affinity, taints, and resource availability, optimizing workload distribution. How do you configure Kubernetes ingress with SSL, TLS?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Set up an ingress resource with an SSL certificate, using either a manually created certificate or integrating with Let's Encrypt for automatic certificate management. What is a Kubernetes daemon set?
3, 2, 1, 0.
A daemon set ensures that a copy of a pod runs on all or selected nodes in the cluster. Commonly used for monitoring agents or network plugins. How do you implement a network policy in Kubernetes?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Use network policy objects to define rules that control ingress and egress traffic for pods, allowing or blocking traffic based on pod labels, namespaces, or IP ranges. How do you roll back a stateful set in Kubernetes?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Stateful set rollbacks are manual. You must update the stateful set manifest to its previous configuration and use kubectl apply to restore the original state. What is the difference between Kubernetes jobs and cron jobs?
3, 2, 1, 0.
A job runs a task once or a specified number of times, while a cron job runs a task on a recurring schedule, e.g., daily, weekly. Both ensure tasks are completed successfully. How do you clean up unused resources in Kubernetes?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Use kubectl delete to remove unused resources like pods, services, and config maps. You can also enable garbage collection to automatically remove orphaned resources. What is the Kubernetes operator pattern?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubernetes operators are a method of extending Kubernetes functionality by packaging, deploying, and managing custom applications using custom controllers that manage their full life cycle. How does Kubernetes handle interpod communication?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubernetes uses a flat network model, where all pods can communicate with each other without NAT. Network policies can be applied to control this communication. What is Kubernetes kubelet?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubelet is an agent that runs on each node in the Kubernetes cluster. It ensures that containers are running in a pod and reports back to the control plane. What is a Kubernetes horizontal pod autoscaler, HPA?
3, 2, 1, 0.
The HPA scales the number of pod replicas in a deployment based on CPU usage, memory, or custom metrics, ensuring applications can handle traffic spikes. What is a pod preset in Kubernetes?
3, 2, 1, 0.
A pod preset injects additional configuration data into a pod, such as environment variables, volumes, or volume mounts, before the pod is created. How can Kubernetes resources be scheduled based on node labels?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Use node selector or node affinity rules in the pod specification to ensure pods are scheduled on nodes with specific labels, e.g., SSD storage, GPU nodes. How does Kubernetes manage storage with storage class?
3, 2, 1, 0.
A storage class defines the storage type for persistent volumes, PVs, allowing dynamic provisioning of storage and determining parameters like replication or disk type. How do you disable a pod from receiving traffic without deleting it?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Mark the pod as not ready using readiness probes or manually evict the pod from a service by modifying the pod's labels or selectors in the service configuration. How do you check the status of a Kubernetes node?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Use kubectl get nodes to view the status of all nodes in a cluster, showing whether they are ready, not ready, or unknown. What is Kubernetes flannel?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Flannel is a simple overlay network for Kubernetes that provides Layer 3 network fabric designed to facilitate pod communication across nodes. What is the difference between a headless service and a normal service in Kubernetes?
3, 2, 1, 0.
A headless service does not assign a cluster IP and instead returns the IP addresses of the associated pods, allowing direct communication for stateful applications. How do Kubernetes probes work?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Liveness, readiness, and startup probes allow Kubernetes to check the health and readiness of a pod. Liveness probes restart the pod if it's unhealthy. Readiness probes remove the pod from service. And startup probes ensure the pod has started properly. How do you enforce image pool policies in Kubernetes?
3, 2, 1, 0.
The image pool policy field in the pod spec defines when Kubernetes should pull an image from a registry. Options include always, if not present, and never. But how does Kubernetes manage IP allocation for pods?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubernetes uses a container network interface, NI, plug-in to assign IP addresses to pods. Each pod receives its own IP address, allowing direct communication with other pods. What is Kubernetes Calico?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Calico is a networking and network security solution for Kubernetes that enables networking policies, securing workloads, and providing efficient pod-to-pod communication. How does Kubernetes support application lifecycle management?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubernetes manages application lifecycle through deployments, stateful sets, jobs, and cron jobs, which ensure correct scaling, availability, and completion of workloads. What is Kubernetes kube proxy?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kube proxy is responsible for maintaining network rules on each node, allowing network communication to your pods from inside or outside the cluster. It manages load balancing for services. What is the Kubernetes cluster DNS?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Cluster DNS is a DNS service that Kubernetes sets up within the cluster, providing automatic name resolution for services and pods using their names as DNS entries. What is kubectl apply and how does it differ from kubectl create?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubectl apply is declarative, used to apply changes to a resource by updating a YAML file, while kubectl create is imperative, creating resources directly in the cluster. How do you use Helm in Kubernetes?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Helm is a package manager for Kubernetes that simplifies deployment by allowing users to define, install, and upgrade Kubernetes applications via reusable templates called charts. What is the difference between a Kubernetes job and a deployment?
3, 2, 1, 0.
A job runs a task to completion, typically used for batch processing, while a deployment manages long-running stateless applications and ensures the correct number of pods are running. What are Kubernetes CRDs, custom resource definitions?
3, 2, 1, 0.
CRDs allow users to define their own custom resources in Kubernetes, extending its functionality beyond the default objects like pods, services, and deployments. What is the Kubernetes ingress controller?
3, 2, 1, 0.
An ingress controller implements rules defined by ingress resources, enabling external HTTPS access to services inside the Kubernetes cluster. How do you manually scale a Kubernetes deployment?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Use the kubectl scale command with the replicas flag, specifying the desired number of replicas. For example, kubectl scale deployment less than name greater than replicas equals 5. How do you troubleshoot Kubernetes pod crashes?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Use kubectl describe pod less than pod underscore name greater than to view detailed pod events. Check logs using kubectl logs less than pod underscore name greater than. and inspect resources like CPU or memory usage with kubectl-top. What is the difference between a stateful set and a deployment in Kubernetes?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Stateful sets are used for stateful applications requiring stable identities and persistent storage, while deployments are used for stateless applications with dynamic scaling. What is Kubernetes Open Policy Agent, OPA?
3, 2, 1, 0.
OPA is a policy engine that integrates with Kubernetes to enforce fine-grained policies across the cluster, providing security, compliance, and governance. How does Kubernetes implement load balancing?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubernetes load balances traffic to services using kubeproxy, which routes traffic to available pod replicas. It can use round-robin or other balancing algorithms. How do you configure pod resource limits and requests?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Specify resources. Requests for minimum resource allocation and resources. Limits for maximum usage. In the pod's YAML file. Ensuring fair resource distribution. What is a Kubernetes kubectl exec command used for?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubectl exec allows you to execute a command in a running container, often used for debugging or inspecting application behavior within a pod. How does Kubernetes handle version skew between components?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubernetes supports version skew to an extent, allowing kubelet, kubeproxy, and other components to be one minor version older or newer than the API server. What is a Kubernetes service mesh?
3, 2, 1, 0.
A service mesh, e.g., Istio, Linked, provides traffic management, security, and observability between services in a Kubernetes cluster, handling service-to-service communication. What is Kubernetes kubectl context?
3, 2, 1, 0.
The kubectl config command allows you to switch between different Kubernetes clusters or namespaces. By changing the active context in your kubeconfig file. What are the different Kubernetes network plugins?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubernetes supports multiple network plugins such as Calico, Flannel, Weave, and Kilium, each implementing different networking and security features. How do you configure multi-zone or multi-region Kubernetes clusters?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Use Kubernetes Federation or set up multiple clusters with shared services, ensuring high availability across zones or regions. Manage them centrally through a control plane. What is Kubernetes Role-Based Access Control, RBAC?
3, 2, 1, 0.
RBAC allows fine-grained control over access to Kubernetes resources, granting permissions based on roles assigned to users or service accounts. What is a Kubernetes pod disruption budget, PDB?
3, 2, 1, 0.
A PDB defines the minimum number of pods that must be available during voluntary disruptions, ensuring high availability during updates or maintenance. How do you configure Kubernetes external storage solutions?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubernetes integrates with external storage providers, e.g., AWS EBS, Azure Disks, using persistent volumes, PV, and storage classes for dynamic provisioning of storage. What is Kubernetes topology-aware routing?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Topology-aware routing enables traffic to be routed to the nearest pod, minimizing latency and improving performance by leveraging zone or region-based traffic routing. How do you perform a Kubernetes disaster recovery?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Use tools like Velero to back up Kubernetes resources and persistent volumes. Store backups in a separate location, and restore them in case a disaster. What is Kubernetes daemon set?
3, 2, 1, 0.
A daemon set ensures that a copy of a pod runs on all or some of the nodes. They are used for node-level operations such as monitoring, logging, or networking. What is the purpose of kubectl port forward?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubectl port forward allows you to forward one or more local ports to a pod's port, enabling access to the pod from your local machine without exposing it through a service. How does Kubernetes handle certificate management?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubernetes manages certificates for internal cluster communication using the Kubernetes Certificate Authority (CA), allowing secure communication between components. You can also use tools like Cert Manager to automate certificate management. What is Kubernetes Kube App-Server?
3, 2, 1, 0.
The Kube App-Server is the central management component of Kubernetes. It exposes the Kubernetes API, handling requests for all other components and external clients. How do you create a Kubernetes namespace?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Use kubectl create namespace less than name greater than to create a namespace. Namespaces help to organize and isolate resources within the cluster. What is Kubernetes node affinity?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Node affinity is a set of rules used to control the scheduling of pods to nodes based on node labels. It allows more flexible pod placement than node selector. How does Kubernetes manage high availability (HA)?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubernetes manages HA by running multiple control plane nodes across different availability zones. Load balancers are used to distribute traffic among nodes. What is the Kubernetes Controller Manager?
3, 2, 1, 0.
The Kubernetes Controller Manager runs control loops that regulate the state of the cluster, such as replication, endpoint management, and node lifecycle management. How do you roll back a deployment in Kubernetes?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Use kubectl rollout undo deployment less than deployment underscore name greater than to revert a deployment to its previous state. How do you limit the number of pod replicas in a namespace?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Use a limit range to enforce resource quotas or a resource quota to restrict the number of pod replicas within a namespace. What is Kubernetes dynamic volume provisioning?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Dynamic volume provisioning automatically provisions storage for persistent volume claims (PVCs) using storage classes, without the need for pre-provisioned persistent volumes. What is Kubernetes secrets and how are they used?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubernetes secrets store and manage sensitive information, such as passwords, API tokens, or SSH keys, and can be injected into pods through environment variables or mounted as files. How does Kubernetes enforce resource allocation fairness between pods?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubernetes enforces fairness using resource requests and resource limits, ensuring pods get a fair share of CPU and memory while avoiding over-provisioning or starvation. How do you manage custom metrics in Kubernetes?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Use the Kubernetes Custom Metrics API to integrate custom metrics from applications into Kubernetes. These metrics can then be used for autoscaling. How do you set up a cluster monitoring solution in Kubernetes?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Use tools like Prometheus, Grafana, and Kube-State metrics to collect and visualize metrics from your cluster, including node health, pod resource usage, and API server performance. What is Kubernetes persistent volume reclaim policy?
3, 2, 1, 0.
The reclaim policy for a persistent volume determines what happens to the volume after a pod has finished using it. Options include retain, recycle, and delete. How does Kubernetes prevent service discovery conflicts?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubernetes assigns a unique cluster IP for each service, ensuring service name uniqueness within the namespace and avoiding conflicts in service discovery. What is a Kubernetes config map and how does it differ from secrets?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Config maps store non-sensitive data like configuration files and environment variables. Unlike secrets, they are not base 64 encoded and are not intended for sensitive information. How do you configure Kubernetes probes for pod health checks?
3, 2, 1, 0.
You can configure 3 types of probes: liveness, readiness, and startup probes. These are used to monitor the health and readiness of containers and adjust their availability. What is a Kubernetes endpoint slice?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Endpoint slices provide a scalable alternative to endpoints, splitting network endpoint information across multiple slices, improving the scalability of service discovery. How does Kubernetes handle multi-cluster management?
3, 2,
Kubernetes uses solutions like Cluster API and Kubernetes Federation to manage multiple clusters, enabling centralized management of workloads across clusters. How do you migrate workloads from one Kubernetes cluster to another?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Workload migration involves exporting resources like deployments and services via YAML files, then importing them into the new cluster. Tools like Velero can handle persistent data migration. What is the role of etcd in Kubernetes?
3, 2, 1, 0.
etcd is a distributed key-value store used by Kubernetes to store all cluster configuration data, ensuring consistent state across the control plane. How do you use network policies in Kubernetes?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Network policies control traffic flow at the IP address or port level between pods and services, allowing you to define ingress and egress rules. How do you deploy applications using Kubernetes Helm?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Helm uses charts, pre-configured Kubernetes resources, to deploy, configure, and manage applications. Helm simplifies complex deployments by bundling them into packages. What is Kubernetes Federation?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubernetes Federation enables the management of multiple clusters as a single entity, providing a unified interface for workloads across different clusters. How does Kubernetes handle persistent storage?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubernetes uses persistent volumes, PVs, and persistent volume claims, PVCs, to abstract storage from underlying infrastructure, allowing flexible storage management. What is the Kubernetes Kube Scheduler?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kube Scheduler is responsible for scheduling pods to nodes in the cluster based on resource requirements, affinity rules, and node capacity. How do you configure pod anti-affinity?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Pod anti-affinity ensures that certain pods are not scheduled on the same node or within the same availability zone. This helps distribute workloads for fault tolerance. How does Kubernetes handle pod eviction?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Pods are evicted if the node is under resource pressure, when a node is drained, or when they violate resource limits. Kubernetes uses priority classes to decide eviction order. What is Kubernetes topology-aware scheduling?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Topology-aware scheduling ensures that workloads are scheduled based on hardware topology, reducing latency and improving performance for applications sensitive to network distance. What is Kubernetes Horizontal Pod Autoscaler (HPA) scaling behavior?
3, 2, 1, 0.
HPA scales pods based on CPU utilization, memory usage, or custom metrics, automatically adjusting the number of replicas to meet resource demands. What is Kubernetes KUBDEM?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubernetes is a tool used to bootstrap and configure Kubernetes clusters. It simplifies the process of setting up a control plane and worker nodes. How do you manage secrets securely in Kubernetes?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubernetes secrets can be encrypted at rest, managed with external secret stores, e.g., HashiCorp Vault, and mounted in pods using volumes or environment variables. What is Kubernetes Pod Disruption Budget (PDB), and how does it work?
3, 2, 1, 0.
A PDB specifies how many pods from a deployment or stateful set can be unavailable during voluntary disruptions, e.g., updates, ensuring high availability. How do you run stateful applications in Kubernetes?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Stateful applications are managed using stateful sets, which ensure pod ordering, persistent storage, and stable network identities across restarts. What is Kubernetes Resource Quota and how does it work?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Resource quota enforces limits on resource usage, e.g., CPU, memory, pods, at the namespace level, preventing any namespace from consuming too many resources. How does Kubernetes handle container runtime interfaces, CRI?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubernetes uses the Container Runtime Interface, CRI, to interact with container runtimes like Docker, Containerd, and CRI-O, abstracting the runtime layer from Kubernetes. How does Kubernetes handle service discovery for external clients?
3, 2, 1, 0.
Kubernetes uses external load balancers or ingress controllers to expose services to external clients, ensuring external traffic is routed correctly to cluster services. How do you configure Kubernetes pod security policies, PSP?
3, 2, 1, 0.
PSPs define security-related rules for pod creation, such as privileged mode, allowed volumes, and allowed capabilities, providing cluster-wide security controls.